What if the woman sitting across from you at a blind date, the one with the nervous smile and the soft eyes, was the same girl who broke your heart 17 years ago? The same girl you cried over in your college dorm room? The same girl whose name you carved into a wooden bench by the lake? The same girl you spent a decade trying to forget? What would you do? Would you walk away? Would you pretend you didn't recognize her? Or would you sit down, pick up the menu, and let the universe finish what it started? Because that is exactly what happened to Daniel Calloway on a cold Friday night in November, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Daniel Calloway was the kind of man who had learned to live without expecting anything good to happen to him. Not because he was bitter, though he had every right to be. Not because he was broken, though there were certainly pieces of him that had never fully healed. He had learned to live without expectation simply because life had taught him, repeatedly and without apology, that hope was a dangerous thing to carry. Hope was heavy. Hope made you vulnerable. And Daniel Calloway could not afford to be vulnerable. Not anymore. Not since he became the sole parent of a 7-year-old boy named Caleb who needed him to be steady, dependable, and whole. Daniel was 38 years old. He had dark brown hair that was starting to go silver at the temples, which his co-workers told him made him look distinguished and which he personally found slightly terrifying. He had broad shoulders from years of working construction before he'd gone back to school and gotten his architecture degree. He had laugh lines around his eyes, though he hadn't been laughing much lately. He drove a used pickup truck that smelled like sawdust and Caleb's fruit snacks. He made breakfast every single morning, scrambled eggs on weekdays, pancakes on weekends, no exceptions. He coached Caleb's Saturday soccer team even though he knew almost nothing about soccer. He read 3 bedtime stories every night, never 2, never 4, always 3, because Caleb had decided that 3 was the perfect number and Daniel had long ago learned that when a 7-year-old makes that kind of declaration, you honor it. He was a good father. Everyone said so. His mother said so. His sister said so. His co-workers said so. His neighbors said so. But being a good father, as Daniel had discovered, was both the most fulfilling and the most exhausting thing a human being could do, and it left very little room for anything else. It left very little room for Daniel himself. That was why, on a Tuesday evening in late October, when his best friend Marcus sat across from him at their usual bar and told him it was time, Daniel almost choked on his beer. Time for what? Daniel asked, though he already knew and already hated the answer. Time to get back out there, Marcus said, with the particular confidence of a man who had been happily married for 11 years and had completely forgotten how terrifying dating was. Marcus, Daniel said slowly, I haven't been on a date since Obama's second term. Which is exactly why we're doing this, Marcus said. My wife's coworker. Her name is Sophie. She's 35. She's a nurse. She's funny. She's kind. She also hasn't dated in a while. You'd be perfect together. Her name is Sophie, Daniel repeated. Yes. You don't know her last name. Marcus hesitated. Elaine didn't mention it. Marcus. Daniel. I'm not doing a blind date. Daniel. I'm serious. You haven't been on a date in 6 years. Caleb needs a mother figure. You need... Don't, Daniel said, his voice dropping, the way it always did when someone got too close to the truth. Don't tell me what I need. Marcus leaned back and was quiet for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, he said, You deserve to be happy, man. Not just as a dad. As a person. You deserve that. And that was the thing about Marcus. He always knew exactly which words would find the crack in Daniel's armor. Because Daniel did know, somewhere deep beneath the early mornings and the soccer practices and the bedtime stories, that there was a version of himself that was lonely. Profoundly, quietly, achingly lonely. He just didn't know what to do with that loneliness. He had gotten so good at carrying it silently that some days he forgot it was there at all. He said yes to the blind date, not because he believed anything would come of it, but because Marcus looked at him with those sincere eyes and said those 6 words, and Daniel was tired of being strong all the time. The date was set for Friday, November 3rd, a restaurant called Calloway's Kitchen, which Marcus thought was hilarious, given that Daniel's last name was Calloway, on 5th and Maple at 7 o'clock in the evening. Daniel's mother came to watch Caleb. She arrived with homemade cookies and a look on her face that was somewhere between hopeful and tearful, which made Daniel feel simultaneously loved and overwhelmed. "You look handsome," she said, adjusting his collar. "Mom," he said. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said. "Mom," he said again, but softer this time, because his father had been gone for 4 years and it still hit him in waves. "Go," she said, smiling. "Be open. Let yourself be surprised." He kissed her cheek. He kissed Caleb, who was already 3 cookies deep and deeply uninterested in his father's departure. He got in his truck and drove toward the restaurant and told himself the whole way there that this was just dinner. Just 2 adults having dinner. Nothing more. Nothing to fear. He was wrong. He walked into Calloway's kitchen at 7 minutes past 7. He was late, which he hated because being late made him anxious and being anxious made his palms sweat, and sweaty palms were not the impression he wanted to make on a first date. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, with exposed brick walls and low jazz music and the smell of garlic bread and something wonderful roasting in the kitchen. The hostess smiled at him and said his reservation was toward the back, private booth, on the left. He followed her through the restaurant. He straightened his jacket. He took a breath. He turned the corner, and the woman sitting in the booth looked up from her menu. And Daniel Calloway's entire world stopped, because he knew her face. He had known her face for 17 years. In his memories, in his dreams, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking when the heart goes looking for the things it has lost. He knew the shape of her eyes and the way her nose turned up slightly at the tip and the small scar on her chin from a bicycle accident she had told him about on their 3rd date, when they were 21 years old and the world seemed infinite and nothing could possibly go wrong. Her name was not Sophie. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Brennan. The woman he had loved completely and lost absolutely when he was 21 years old. His first love. His first heartbreak. The woman he had spent 17 years trying to forget. And she was sitting across from him at a blind date. For a moment. One long, suspended, airless moment. Neither of them moved. The jazz music played. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. A waiter passed with a tray of wine. And Daniel and Sarah looked at each other across 17 years of silence, and neither of them said a single word. Then Sarah's face went through a sequence of emotions so rapid and so transparent that Daniel, who had once known her expressions better than his own, could read each one clearly. Shock, recognition, disbelief, something that might have been joy and might have been terror, and then, settling over all of it like a curtain falling gently into place. A kind of stillness. "Daniel," she said. It wasn't a question. It was barely a word. It was just his name, spoken in a voice he had not heard in 17 years, and it landed in the center of his chest like something warm. "Sarah," he said. Another pause. The hostess had long since disappeared. They were alone in the corner of the restaurant, separated by a small table and 17 years of living. "You're," she began. "Marcus set me up," he said. "His wife's co-worker. He said her name was Sophie?" "My middle name," Sarah said softly. "I've been going by my middle name. After everything. I needed a change." "Sarah Sophie Brennan," he said slowly, remembering. He had forgotten she had a middle name. He had forgotten a lot of things, apparently. Or maybe he had simply buried them so deeply that excavating them now felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. She looked at him like she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. He understood the feeling exactly because he was having it himself. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "I can go. I can call Marcus and tell him." "Do you want to go?" she asked. He looked at her. She looked at him. The jazz played something slow and inevitable. "No," he said honestly. "I don't." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. "Then sit down, Daniel." He sat down. He picked up the menu. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part of him that was still 21 years old and still completely gone for this woman, something that had been sleeping for 17 years began, very slowly, to wake up. They ordered without discussing what had happened. They asked each other careful, surface-level questions. What did she do? Nurse, cardiology unit, 17 years. What did he do? Architect. He had gone back to school. She looked surprised by that, pleasantly so. He ordered the salmon. She ordered the pasta. They drank water instead of wine because both of them seemed to sense that they needed to stay very, very clear-headed for whatever this evening was going to become. It was Caleb who broke the surface. Not literally, Caleb was at home eating cookies with his grandmother. But Daniel mentioned him. He hadn't planned to. It came out naturally, the way Caleb always did, woven into everything Daniel said and thought and was. "I should tell you," he said, setting down his fork. "I have a son. He's 7. His name is Caleb." Something moved across Sarah's face. Tenderness, maybe. "Tell me about him." And Daniel, who was usually so careful about how much of himself he gave away, who had built walls so high and so solid that most people didn't even know they existed, found himself talking about Caleb. Really talking. The way Caleb laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. The way he always put his shoes on the wrong feet and refused to be corrected. The way he had recently decided that dinosaurs were his religion and could lecture you for 45 minutes on the dietary habits of the Brachiosaurus. The way he sometimes climbed into Daniel's bed in the middle of the night and pressed his cold little feet against Daniel's legs and said, "I'm here, Dad." As though he knew, somehow, that his father needed that the darkness was bigger for Daniel than he let on. Sarah was smiling by the time Daniel finished. Not the polite smile of a first date, but a real smile, full and warm and genuine. "He sounds incredible," she said. "He is," Daniel said simply. "He's the best thing that ever happened to me." Then, because fairness demanded it, and because he was sitting across from the woman who had once known everything about him, he asked the question he had been carefully avoiding since he sat down. "What about you? Did you ever get married? Do you have—" "No," she said quietly. "No husband. No children." She looked down at her pasta for a moment. "That's actually a longer story than we probably have time for tonight." "We have time," he said. She looked up at him and something complicated passed through her eyes. "You might not want to hear it, Daniel. Try me." She was quiet for a long moment. The restaurant had gotten busier and louder around them. But their corner remained somehow separate from it all, a small island of stillness in the noise. "After I left," she began. "After you left me," he said. Not bitterly, just accurately. She accepted the correction with a small nod. "After I left you, I spent a long time thinking I'd made the right decision. I'd been accepted to the nursing program in Seattle. I thought I needed to be free. I thought love at 21 couldn't possibly be the real thing. I thought there would be other people, better times, more opportunities." "And were there?" he asked. "There were people," she said carefully. "There was one person for a long time, for almost 8 years. We were engaged." She paused. "He left me 3 weeks before the wedding. He said he had realized he was in love with someone else." "Sarah," Daniel said. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," she said quickly. "I'm telling you because it matters to the rest. After that, I moved back here, tried to start over, took on extra shifts at the hospital, told myself I was fine. And then Elaine, Marcus's wife, I work with her in cardiology. Elaine told me she knew someone. A good man, she said. A single father. And I told her I wasn't ready, and she told me I'd been not ready for 4 years, and maybe I should try being ready for a change." Daniel found himself smiling despite himself. "That sounds exactly like what Marcus said to me." "Maybe they planned it," Sarah said. There was a beat of silence. "Daniel, did you know? When you walked in, did you know it was going to be me?" "I didn't know your name," he said. "Marcus only told me Sophie." "If he had told you it was me," she said slowly, "would you still have come?" He considered the question carefully and honestly. "I don't know," he said. "The honest answer is that I don't know. Because what you did, leaving the way you did without a real conversation, just a letter, that hurt me in ways I'm not sure I've fully gotten past." She didn't flinch from that. He gave her credit for it. "I know," she said. "I have always known that. And I have always been ashamed of it." "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad," he said. "I know," she said again. "But Daniel, I need you to know. Walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life. I have known that for a very long time. I just never knew how to find my way back." The words sat between them like something breakable and precious. Daniel looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way he used to when they were young. Openly, without guard, taking her in completely. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it automatically, the parental reflex so deeply ingrained he couldn't suppress it. It was his mother. He read the text and everything else fell away. "Caleb has a fever. Hi. He's asking for you. Come home." He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand. His jacket was already in his hands. His mind had already left the restaurant and was already in his truck, already on the highway, already walking through his front door. "I have to go," he said. "Caleb, he's sick. My mother, she said his fever is high and—" "Go," Sarah said immediately, and she was already waving for the waiter, already reaching for her purse. "Go right now. Don't worry about anything here." "I'm sorry," he said. This is not how I wanted—" "Daniel," she said, looking up at him with an expression that made his chest ache. "Your son needs you. Go." He left. He left money on the table. Probably too much, he couldn't count straight. And he walked quickly through the restaurant and out into the cold November air, and he drove home with his hands tight on the wheel and his heart somewhere between the restaurant and his house, divided in ways he hadn't expected. Caleb was burning up when he got there. Not dangerously, the thermometer said 102.4, which was high but not emergency room high, which was the first thing Daniel checked because he was a father and that was always the first calculation. His mother had given Caleb children's acetaminophen and put a cool cloth on his forehead, and Caleb was lying on the couch under his favorite dinosaur blanket looking absolutely miserable and unbearably small. "Dad?" Caleb said when Daniel walked in, and the relief in that one word was so profound that it broke Daniel open a little, the way it always did. "Hey, bud," Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the couch and pressing his lips to Caleb's forehead the way parents do, the human thermometer. "I'm here. I'm cold," Caleb said, "and hot, both." "I know," Daniel said. "That's what a fever does. It's your body fighting something off. Your body is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do." "Fighting is tiring," Caleb said. "It is," Daniel agreed. "That's why we're going to let your body rest." He pulled the dinosaur blanket up higher. His mother brought him a glass of water and a look that said many things simultaneously, primarily, "How was the date? And we'll talk about this later." Daniel gave her a look back that said, "Please, not tonight." His mother kissed them both and left. Daniel stayed on the couch with Caleb all night. He checked the fever every hour. He refilled the water glass. He told Caleb the story of a brachiosaurus who went on an adventure and got a little sick but was okay because he had his herd around him. And Caleb fell asleep halfway through the story with his small hand curled around Daniel's finger. Daniel sat in the dark for a long time after that. He sat and listened to Caleb breathe, and he thought about the restaurant and the jazz music and Sarah across the table. And he felt the particular mixture of longing and fear that he had taught himself to suppress. Only now it was back, fully and completely, refusing to be suppressed. He had been in love with Sarah Brennan when he was 21 years old. He had loved her the way you can only love someone the first time. Recklessly, completely, with no self-protection whatsoever. She had been his whole world for 2 years. She had been the person he thought about when he thought about the future. She was supposed to be in that future. And then one morning he had woken up and found a letter on his pillow, and Sarah was gone, and the future he had imagined collapsed completely. He had rebuilt himself. It had taken years and it had been painful in ways that didn't show on the outside, but he had done it. And then he had met Emma, Caleb's mother, which was its own complicated story. They had been together for 2 years, never married, and when Emma found out she was pregnant, she had been honest with Daniel in a way that was both devastating and, he had eventually come to understand, compassionate. She had told him she wasn't ready to be a mother. She had told him she didn't love him the way he deserved to be loved. She had asked him what he wanted to do, and Daniel had said, without hesitation, that he wanted the baby. Emma had agreed to let him raise Caleb. She paid child support. She sent birthday cards. She had met Caleb twice, both times when Caleb was too young to remember. She lived in Portland now. Daniel didn't hate her for any of it. He had made his peace with the shape of his life. But sitting in the dark with his sick son, thinking about a woman he had never fully stopped loving, he was aware that his peace was somewhat theoretical. He texted Sarah the next morning. He hadn't planned to. He had decided, in the cold logic of 3 in the morning, that it was too complicated, too messy, too much. He had a son to raise and a career to manage and walls he had spent years building, and it was simply too much. Then Caleb woke up, fever mostly broken, and the first thing he said was, "Dad, did your date go okay?" And Daniel, caught completely off guard, said, "How do you know about my date?" And Caleb said, very seriously, "Grandma told me. She said you went to meet someone special, and I said, what if she's nice, and I hope she is because you deserve nice, Dad." And something about his 7-year-old son saying you deserve nice, Dad, in that completely earnest, unfiltered way that only children can manage, dismantled every wall Daniel had rebuilt in the night. He texted Sarah, "How did you get home?" Her reply came in 3 minutes. "Uber." "How is Caleb?" "Better. Fever's almost gone. He's demanding pancakes, so I'd say we're on the mend." "Good. I'm glad he's okay." A pause. Then he typed, "I'm sorry about last night. I wanted to, there's a lot we didn't get to." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I know. There is." He flipped the first pancake. He looked at Caleb, who was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a dinosaur with what appeared to be 47 legs. He typed, "Would you want to try again?" The pause this time was the longest. He flipped another pancake. He poured Caleb's orange juice. He told himself that whatever she said was fine, that he was prepared for any answer, that he was an adult man and not the 21-year-old who had sat on his dorm room floor holding a letter and falling apart. Her reply came just as he was sliding the pancakes onto Caleb's plate. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They met 4 more times over the following 3 weeks. Coffee on a Sunday morning when Caleb was at soccer. Lunch on a Wednesday when Daniel had a break between client meetings. A walk along the river trail one Saturday evening that lasted almost 2 hours and covered, over the course of those 2 hours, an astonishing amount of ground. His father's death, her broken engagement, his years as a single father, her decision to move back to their hometown, the small ways they had each changed and the ways they had stubbornly remained the same. On the 4th meeting, dinner again, a different restaurant this time, she told him something she had been holding back. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "about why I left. The real reason. Not just the nursing program." He waited. He had learned, in those 3 weeks, that Sarah needed space to arrive at difficult things. She was like a ship that had to take a long, wide turn. You couldn't rush her. You had to let her navigate at her own speed. "I was pregnant," she said. The word landed in the silence of the restaurant like something dropped from a great height. Daniel looked at her. His face was absolutely still. "We were together for 2 years," she continued. Her voice steady, but her hands, folded on the table, were not quite steady. "I found out 3 weeks before I left. Panicked. I was 21. I had the nursing program. I had a whole future planned that I wasn't ready. I told myself you weren't ready. I told myself it was the right thing." "Sarah," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I lost the baby," she said. "It was a miscarriage. 7 weeks. I was in Seattle and I was alone and I lost the baby and I couldn't call you. Because calling you meant explaining why I hadn't told you. And explaining that meant you finding out that I had left without telling you that I was pregnant with your child." She exhaled. Her eyes were bright. "I have carried that for 17 years. I need you to know that I have carried it every single day." Daniel was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that a waiter came and went and the candle on the table burned lower and the restaurant noise seemed to recede to a far distance. He looked at his hands on the table and he looked at hers and he looked at the space between them. "I would have stayed," he finally said. "If you had told me, I would have." "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't tell you. Because I knew you would stay, and I was terrified that you would stay out of obligation. That we would be trapped. That you would eventually resent me. I told myself I was protecting you and maybe some part of me was. But mostly I was just scared." "You should have told me," he said. "Yes," she said. "No excuses." No defense. Just agreement. You should have trusted me, he said. Yes, she said again. He looked at her. His eyes were wet, which surprised him. He had not expected to cry tonight. He pressed his fingers to his eyes briefly, and when he took them away he was still looking at her and the emotion was still there, but alongside it something else was rising. Something complicated and old and specific to this woman and this history that he couldn't name precisely but recognized deeply. I would have wanted to know, he said. I would have wanted, even if it ended the same way, even if we lost the baby the same way, I would have wanted to be there. You didn't give me the choice. No, she agreed. I didn't, and that was wrong. Profoundly wrong. And I am more sorry than I have ever been sorry for anything in my entire life. He looked at the candle for a long time. He thought about Caleb, and about the moment Caleb was placed in his arms for the first time. The weight of him, the smallness, the absolute, terrifying, transforming love of it. He thought about what it meant to lose that. He thought about Sarah, 21 years old, alone in a city she didn't know, going through that loss without him. Were you alone? He asked. When you lost the baby, were you alone? Something in her face cracked. Yes, she whispered. I was completely alone, and despite everything. Despite the letter and the 17 years and the secret she had carried. What he felt in that moment, sitting across from her, was not anger, or not only anger. What he also felt was grief, real and specific, for a loss he was only learning about now. For a baby that had been briefly and terribly his without his knowledge. For a 21-year-old version of Sarah who had been alone with something unbearable. I'm sorry you were alone, he said quietly. You should not have been alone. She pressed her hand briefly over her mouth. When she took it away, she said, I don't deserve your compassion. Maybe not, he said, but I'm feeling it anyway. They didn't resolve everything that night. Some things cannot be resolved in a single conversation over restaurant food. They parted in the parking lot with a careful hug, the kind between people who are still finding the edges of each other, feeling for the places that are still tender. He drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. He felt broken open in a way that was not entirely terrible. Like a window thrown wide on a cold morning. Uncomfortable, yes, but also necessary. Also clarifying. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in his dark room and he thought about grief and forgiveness and the way time changes things without healing them and the way some people are so woven into the fabric of who you are that finding them again, years later, feels less like a reunion and more like a reckoning. He thought about Caleb. Because everything always came back to Caleb. What would it mean to let Sarah Brennan back into his life? What would it mean to let her near his son? He was not a man who made those decisions carelessly. Caleb had already grown up without one parent's consistent presence. The women Daniel had briefly dated in the years since Caleb was born. None of them had ever met Caleb, because Daniel maintained that boundary with absolute clarity. Caleb was not to be introduced to anyone until Daniel was certain. Not cautiously hopeful, not tentatively optimistic, but genuinely, deeply certain that this was something real and lasting. Was Sarah Brennan something real and lasting? He didn't know. What he knew was that she was complicated and imperfect and carrying a long history of hurt, both his and her own. What he knew was that he had felt more like himself in the past 3 weeks than he had in years. What he knew was that Caleb had said you deserve nice, Dad, in that earnest, uncomplicated, devastating 7-year-old way, and that Daniel was tired of deciding he didn't. He called his sister. Her name was Patricia, and she was 53 minutes older than Daniel, a fact she mentioned regularly, and she was also the most perceptive person he had ever known. Tell me everything, she said, and she said it the way she always did. Not as a request but as an inevitability, as though she already knew the conversation was coming and had set aside the time. He told her everything. About the blind date. About Sarah. About the 17 years. About the miscarriage. About the dinners and the river walk and the text messages and his hands on the steering wheel at 3 in the morning. He talked for almost an hour. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her and meant she understood this was serious. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does your gut tell you?" My gut is unreliable when it comes to this woman, he said. It always has been. No, Patricia said. I don't mean what does your gut tell you about whether she's trustworthy or whether she'll hurt you again. I mean what does your gut tell you about whether you love her? He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the ceiling of his dark bedroom. Yes, he said finally. God help me, yes. Then that's where you start, Patricia said simply. Everything else, the trust, the fear, the history, that's the work. That's what comes after. But if the love is there, Daniel, then the work is worth doing. He lay there after he hung up and let that settle. The love is there. The work is worth doing. He thought about his father, who had been gone 4 years and who had loved his mother for 41 years with a consistency and a depth that Daniel had spent his entire life trying to understand and emulate. His father used to say that love wasn't a feeling, it was a decision, and that the feeling was just what showed you which direction to decide. Maybe he had been right. Maybe love was showing Daniel a direction now. He thought forward. December arrived, and with it, the particular magic that Daniel's little house always seemed to accumulate in the holiday season. The paper snowflakes Caleb made at school and taped to every available window, the overexcited selection of a Christmas tree that was too large for the living room but which Caleb insisted on, the baking sessions that produced cookies of wildly varying quality and tremendous enthusiasm. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine and everything Daniel associated with the best version of his life. He had continued seeing Sarah. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. They were taking it slowly, the way people do when they have learned that fast can lead to catastrophic. They were rebuilding something, relearning each other, not as the people they had been at 21 but as the people they were now. Sarah was different than he remembered. More careful, more deliberate, more serious in some ways. But the core of her, the warmth, the sharp intelligence, the way she looked at things with complete attention, the way she found something worth caring about in everyone she met, that was exactly the same. He had fallen in love with that core when he was 21. He admitted to himself somewhere in the second week of December, falling in love with it again. He told her about the miscarriage. Not on the night she told him, when he had still been processing, but 2 weeks later, sitting in her apartment over Chinese takeout, he told her that he had been thinking about it. About the baby. About the fact that he had a child he never knew about, briefly, at a terrible cost. I grieved for it, he said. After you told me. I didn't expect to because I didn't know, and you can't grieve what you didn't know. But I did.
Ido.
Me too, she said. Still. Every year on the date. I mark it privately. I always have. He looked at her. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you come on the blind date? You could have said no. Elaine must have told you it was a single dad. She told me you were a wonderful man who deserved a chance, Sarah said. She didn't know our history. She just knew what Marcus had told her about you. She paused. And I was ready to try. Like I told you. I had been not ready for a very long time. And I was tired of being not ready. So I said yes. She looked at him with those eyes that he had been trying to forget for 17 years. I didn't know it was you, but I think part of me was hoping for something real. And then you walked in, and it was you, and I thought maybe the universe was giving me a chance to fix the worst thing I ever did. You can't undo it, he said. No, she agreed. But maybe I can make something true now. Something good. If you'll let me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a condition. Okay, she said carefully. Caleb, he said. Everything with me comes with Caleb. He's not a separate part of my life, he's the center of it. And before anything, before we call this whatever it's going to be, before we take the next step, you have to meet him. Not as my girlfriend, not with any pressure. Just as a person in my life who I'd like him to know. And I need to see how that feels. For both of you. Of course, she said. There was no hesitation. Not even a breath of it. I would be honored. He prepared Caleb as carefully as he could, which is to say he kept it simple, because simple was what worked with 7-year-olds. A friend of mine is going to come to the park with us Saturday, he said, one Thursday evening while Caleb was eating his before-bath apple slices. What friend? Caleb asked. Her name is Sarah. Caleb considered this. Is she a work friend?
No.
She's more of a regular friend. A good friend. Caleb ate an apple slice. Does she like dinosaurs? I don't actually know, Daniel admitted. I'll tell her about them, Caleb said generously, with the confidence of a boy who had never met anyone he couldn't educate about paleontology. She might like them after. Some people just don't know yet. That's very open-minded of you, Daniel said. What does open-minded mean? Caleb asked. It means you're willing to give people a chance, Daniel said. Caleb nodded with great seriousness. I'm definitely that, he said. Saturday was cold but clear, the kind of December day that looks like it should be inside a snow globe, bright blue sky, frost on the grass, breath visible in the air, the park mostly quiet because sensible people were indoors by the fire. Caleb was in his puffy orange coat, his small face rosy from the cold, running ahead of Daniel on the path and then running back to check on him, the way he always did, like a very affectionate and hyperactive border collie. Sarah was already at the park when they arrived. She was sitting on a bench near the old oak tree with her coat buttoned up to her chin and her hands wrapped around a takeaway cup of coffee, and she looked up when she heard them coming and she smiled, that real smile, not the polite one. Daniel raised a hand. She raised hers. Caleb stopped running and went very still in that particular way of children who are assessing a new situation with intense focus. Caleb, Daniel said, coming up beside him. This is my friend Sarah. Sarah crouched down to Caleb's level, which was the right move. Daniel filed that away without comment. Hi, Caleb, she said. I've heard you know a lot about dinosaurs. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. How did you know that? Your dad mentioned it, she said. He said you might be able to teach me something. I really don't know very much about them. A pause. Caleb looked at her very seriously. Then he said, Okay, I'll start with sauropods because that's the most important group. Do you know what a sauropod is? I don't, Sarah said, completely seriously. Then we have a lot of work to do, Caleb said. He reached out and took her hand, just like that, the way children do without permission or preamble, and began walking her toward the climbing structure, talking at full speed about long necks and quadrupedal locomotion, while Sarah went willingly and listened with the focus of someone who had decided that this mattered. Daniel stood on the path and watched his son take Sarah Brennan by the hand, and his heart did something that he didn't have words for. Something that was part joy and part terror and part grief and part the particular expansiveness that comes when you allow yourself, after a very long time, to want something. He walked after them. He did not go slowly. Christmas came. Caleb got a telescope, which was not what he had asked for but which Daniel had decided on because Caleb had mentioned stars once, in passing, and Daniel had stored it the way he stored all of Caleb's passing enthusiasms, waiting to see which ones would take root. This one did. Caleb stood in the backyard in his pajamas and his orange coat on Christmas night and looked through the telescope at a sky brilliant with winter stars and said, Dad, there's so many. There's so many. In a voice of complete wonder, and Daniel stood beside him and thought that this was it. This was the whole thing. This was what everything was for. He had invited Sarah to Christmas dinner. She had come with homemade pie and a book for Caleb about prehistoric life illustrated with scientific accuracy, which Caleb received with the reverence of someone receiving a holy text. Daniel's mother had been entirely too gracious about the whole thing, hugging Sarah and fussing over her in a way that made Daniel simultaneously grateful and mortified. Patricia had come with her husband and her 2 teenage daughters, and she had shaken Sarah's hand with the calm, measuring look of someone who loved her brother enough to evaluate everyone who came near him, and then, at the end of the evening, had caught Daniel's eye across the living room and given a small nod that meant, Okay, I approve. Daniel's approval was the only one that truly mattered, of course. But having his families felt like something being completed that he hadn't known was unfinished. January. February. The world was frozen outside, and inside Daniel's house something was quietly and steadily thawing. Sarah had a key to the front door now, not because they had formally decided anything, but because she was there often enough that the situation had made the key an obvious practical conclusion. She helped with homework. She made soup when Caleb got a cold in February and came over with 3 kinds and let Caleb vote on which one he wanted, and Caleb voted for all 3, and she laughed that full, genuine laugh and made all 3, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table watching the two of them and felt something he could only describe as the specific happiness of a man who has finally stopped bracing for impact. He was still afraid sometimes. He would not pretend otherwise. There were nights when he would wake up at 2 in the morning and the old terror would be there. The memory of the letter on the pillow, the 17 years, the secret she had kept, and he would have to work through it deliberately, the way you work through anything that has scarred you. He talked to a therapist about it. He had started seeing one the previous autumn, before the blind date, because he had recognized that carrying everything silently was no longer working. He talked to Marcus. He talked to Patricia. He talked to Sarah, who listened to his fears without becoming defensive and who said, every time, the same thing. I'm not going anywhere. I know you don't know that yet, but I'm not going anywhere. You can't force trust. You can only demonstrate it repeatedly over time. And Sarah demonstrated it repeatedly over time. And Daniel, who was not a man who forgave easily or forgot at all, found that forgiveness was not the impossibility he had imagined. It was not the erasure of what had happened. It was the decision to stop letting what happened determine what could happen. It was, as his father might have said, a direction to decide. He decided. March. A Saturday afternoon, early spring. The first tentative warmth in the air after a long winter. Daniel was in the backyard watching Caleb kick a soccer ball against the fence, which Caleb had decided to do because Sarah had mentioned once that she had played soccer in high school, and Caleb had immediately decided this was the most important skill he could possibly acquire. Sarah came out with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside Daniel on the back steps. They sat for a while watching Caleb. The yard was still winter bare, but you could feel the earth starting to turn. Something about early spring always felt like a held breath being slowly released. I have something to ask you, Daniel said. Okay, she said. He looked at his coffee mug. He had rehearsed this multiple times, in the way that people rehearse things they are simultaneously certain about and terrified of. He had rehearsed it in the truck. He had rehearsed it at 2 in the morning. He had rehearsed it in the shower. It had sounded different every time, but the center of it was always the same. I know we have history, he said. A lot of it. And I know it's not simple. And I know that I'm a package deal, that saying yes to me means saying yes to soccer practice and dinosaur lectures and pancake Saturdays and the fact that I will always put Caleb first. I know, she said. And I know that you made a decision 17 years ago that hurt me badly, he said. And that I chose to forgive that. Not because it didn't matter but because you matter more. Because what we are right now, what we've built in these past months, matters more. Daniel, she said softly. I'm not finished, he said. He looked at her then, directly, the way he had learned to look at things that scared him, with his eyes completely open. I love you, Sarah. I think I loved you when I was 21 and I think I kept some portion of that love somewhere all this time without knowing what to do with it, and now I know what to do with it. I want to do this. All of it. Properly and officially and openly. I want you to be part of this life. My life. Our life. Caleb's and mine. Her eyes were full. She pressed her lips together. She blinked. I love you too, she said. I have loved you for longer than I've known what to do with it. And I know I have to earn this every day. I know I have to prove it. And I want to. Daniel, I want nothing more. He took her hand. She turned hers over and held his. Caleb, across the yard, chose this precise moment to successfully execute a particularly dramatic kick, sending the ball flying over the fence and into the neighbor's garden, and then turned to look at them with an expression of complete triumph, completely unaware that anything significant had just happened between the 2 adults on the steps. Did you see that? Caleb shouted. We saw it, Daniel called back. I'm basically a professional, Caleb announced. Sarah laughed. Daniel laughed. Caleb retrieved his ball and resumed kicking with a professional's dedication. And the early spring air was soft and the coffee was warm, and Daniel Calloway, who had learned to live without expecting anything good to happen, let himself sit in the fullness of a moment that was everything he had not dared to want. It was not easy after that. Nothing real ever is. There were difficult conversations yet to come. Telling Caleb in age-appropriate and honest terms who Sarah was and what she was becoming to them, and watching Caleb receive this information with the intense seriousness of a 7-year-old who understands more than he lets on. There were the nights when old fears resurfaced and needed to be spoken aloud rather than swallowed. There were the tender places in both of them, the old wounds that needed tending, that needed patience and care and the willingness to be honest even when honesty was uncomfortable. There was a Saturday in April when Caleb, out of nowhere, at the breakfast table, asked Daniel if Sarah was going to be his mom. Daniel had set down his spatula very carefully. He had sat across from Caleb and looked at his son's completely open face and said, "How would you feel about that?" Caleb had thought about it with great seriousness for a considerable time. Then he said, "I think she likes dinosaurs the right amount. Not too much and not fake." "That's your criteria," Daniel said. "And she makes good soup," Caleb added. "And she listens when I talk. Some grown-ups don't listen. She always does." "She does," Daniel agreed. "Then yes," Caleb said. "I'd feel good about that." He picked up his fork. "Can I have more pancakes?" Daniel had sat at that breakfast table for a moment after Caleb went back to his pancakes, and he had let himself feel it. The fullness of it. The particular blessedness of a life that had been broken and rebuilt into something that might be, against all odds and reasonable expectation, more beautiful for having been broken. "She listens when I talk. Some grown-ups don't. She always does." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. A year after the blind date, Daniel Calloway stood in the park where he had first watched Sarah take his son's hand and walk with him toward the climbing structure. It was November again. The trees were bare again. The sky was the same cold, clear blue. He had a ring in his coat pocket. Nothing extravagant. He was an architect who drove a used truck and made pancakes on Saturday mornings, and that was the kind of man he was. And Sarah, who loved him exactly as he was, would not have wanted extravagant. The ring was simple and honest and carefully chosen, and he had carried it in his pocket for 3 days while he tried to find the right moment. Sarah was beside him. Caleb was ahead of them on the path, chasing a bird with absolutely no expectation of catching it and complete joy in the attempt. "1 year ago tonight," Daniel said. "I know," she said. "I walked into a restaurant and found the person I'd spent 17 years trying to forget." "I'm sorry about the 17 years, she said. "I'm not," he said, and he meant it. Not because the pain hadn't been real, but because all of it, every part of it, the loss and the grief and the long years of rebuilding, had made him exactly the person he was now, standing in this park on this cold November evening. The person who knew how to appreciate this. The person who was not too young or too careless to understand what he was holding. He stopped walking. Sarah stopped beside him. He reached into his coat pocket. She looked at him. Her eyes went wide and then very still. "Sarah Sophie Brennan," he said. "I love you imperfectly and honestly and completely. I love you as you are, not as you were or as you might have been. I love you for being brave enough to sit at that table when I walked in. I love you for telling me the truth, even the hard truths, even when it cost you something. I love you for taking my son's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world." He opened the box. The ring caught the winter light. "I am not asking you to fix the past. I'm asking you to be part of the future. My future. Caleb's future. Our future. Will you?" "Yes," she said. She didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. "Yes, yes, Daniel. Yes." Caleb came running back from his failed bird pursuit, skidded to a stop, looked at the ring box in his father's hand and the tears on both their faces, and with the supreme pragmatism of an 8-year-old who has just turned a corner, said, "Does this mean she's my mom now?" "If she'll have us," Daniel said. Caleb looked at Sarah. "Will you have us?" he asked. Sarah Brennan, future stepmother, crouched down to his level the same way she had on the first day in the park, and she said, "I will. I absolutely will." Caleb considered this. Then, with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice delivering a verdict, he said, "Good. I'm going to teach you everything I know about Cretaceous fauna. It's going to take a while." "I have time," she said. "I have all the time." She looked up at Daniel over Caleb's head. He looked back at her. Around them the bare November trees stood patient and enduring, and the path ahead was open, and the light was beginning to go golden on the horizon the way it does at the end of days that have been very long and are finally finally arriving at something they were always meant to reach. Here is what Daniel Calloway would tell you if you asked him what he learned. He would tell you that the universe has a long memory and a strange sense of timing. He would tell you that forgiveness is not a feeling but a practice, a daily choice, a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it. He would tell you that being a good father and being a full human being are not in competition, that Caleb taught him this, that children have a way of knowing what you need even when you've hidden it from yourself. He would tell you that love is not something you leave behind. It goes underground. It waits. It is patient in ways you never asked it to be. He would tell you that the worst thing that ever happened to him led him back to the best thing he ever felt, and that the journey between those 2 points was not wasted. Not a single year of it, not a single difficult morning, not a single 3 a.m. when the house was dark and the loneliness was loud. All of it was preparation. All of it was necessary. All of it was, in its own strange and painful and ultimately merciful way, exactly right. He would tell you to stay open, not naive open. There is a difference. Naivety ignores the risk. Openness acknowledges it and decides that some things are worth the risk anyway. That some people are worth the risk. That the life you are building is worth the risk of letting someone else help you build it. He would tell you that love, when it finds you again after a long time, feels different than it did the first time. Less like lightning and more like warmth. Less like a storm and more like a hearth. Less like something happening to you and more like something you are choosing, deliberately and with full knowledge, every single day. And he would tell you, this part he would say quietly, looking at the ring on Sarah's hand and the boy running ahead of them down the path and the ordinary extraordinary life that had assembled itself around him while he wasn't looking. He would tell you that happy endings are not the absence of difficulty. They are the presence of love, in all its imperfect, persistent, patient, choosing, deciding, brave and determined reality. They are this. Exactly this. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you believe in or hope for or are holding on to, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one waiting for you here, stories about real love and second chances and the beautiful, complicated, resilient ways human beings find their way back to each other. Don't miss them. We'll see you in the next one.